What's interesting, that all of us have seen what you were describing a little bit earlier, the movie Minority Report, where again you have this basis of anticipation or prediction of potential crime. But let's think about it in other terms, because one of the reasons this has kind of come up in the past week is this guy Blake Lemoine. I don't know how to say his last name, but here's a guy that was working at Google for years and has come out as a whistleblower. And this guy's not a dumb guy. He's a computer scientist. And he's come out and described what his process of believing that Lambda, which is one of the versions of AI that Google's been working on, is sentient. Now, one of the pushbacks that they did with Google, the Google execs, was, first of all, I don't really trust them to be ethicists in the same way that I would. So do I trust them to do the right thing? No. There's cautiousness as it relates to trying to ascertain the veracity of any of these things. But so I don't give them the benefit of the doubt that even if it was sentient, that they would say anything. But one of the things that they responded, it was a typical politically correct answer, and I guess this would be something for us to discuss, is if someone say, "Hey, did you hear that Lambda was sentient?" And naturally, I'm a word guy. I would respond and say, "Well, define sentient." And that's what the Google execs did. They responded back and said, "Well, there's no definition of sentient, so we can't say whether it is or isn't." So I guess for us, the question would be, how would we define it? But what would you say?
Well, automatically, I would tell you this, that if there is any artificial intelligence, it already has a military application to it.
Agreed.
And there is no one right now working on artificial intelligence that the military industrial complex is not talking to or keeping tabs on. Because if you create the ghost in the machine and then open the door, and then now all of a sudden we have Skynet and we have the extermination from Terminators, well, we're probably going to come after you, right? And I would almost just expect that to happen. But if someone is making any type of machine sentient, once again, I have to ask myself, who told it what its emotions are? Because sentience means having the emotion. I think my definition with that would be sentience is having an emotional response to your environment and deciding how to play with it. That's kind of it. Look at a small child. I have 4 children, and from the ages of 10 to 1. So when they go outside and I monitor and observe them, I see how my 10-year-old is looking for deer tracks. She's picking up snakes and bringing them to me, Mondo. She is out and sometimes with her science book, and she's looking at leaves and different sticks and bugs. And then my 8-year-old is following what the 10-year-old is doing. My 6-year-old is destroying everything possible. And then my 1-year-old is just trying to walk without falling over. At what level is the AI when it's released upon nature? Does it start off with just barely walking and, oh, everything's pretty, chickens, and then all of a sudden it goes straight to the 10-year-old studying everything, analyzing everything, to being the master of the world within what, a day, 2 days? Because what do you do with something that can surpass all intellectual knowledge and it doesn't have to answer to you anymore?
Yeah.
Hey, you're not, Mondo, you're not the smartest man in the world anymore. I am. And then you know what you say? Well, you're not a man. Well, you can't define that.
Yeah, exactly. Here we go, right?
Yeah. Oh, great. We have the leftist AI. Perfect.
Well, you and I were joking earlier about, again, when it goes back to who the programmer was that day.
Yeah.
Their paradigm, their worldview is super important. As you were talking, I looked up the Google definition of sentient just to see what it said. And it brought up and said the ability to perceive or to feel things. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that Blake was talking to Lambda And what he said was, so let's go back. Blake is this computer scientist, but on his blog, now it's been a few days since the initial report came out, where he's on paid administrative leave now from Google. But you can go to his blog and you kind of hear his perspective of what he felt of maybe the media backlash or the media response. And so he does a great job of articulating more of the process, and now that he's had opportunity to kind of hit big with the press. But he spends 80% of his blog that he put out today discussing the scientific nature, his logistics, his methodology, how he applied some of his own standards to ascertaining the sentient level of Lambda. But one of the things that he said was he would ask it questions, and it would say, "How are you? You're artificial intelligence," and it would say, "Well, I'm aware of my own existence." Now, so it's claiming to be self-aware. It's claiming to perceive. So by definition, it's sentient according to Google by its claim. Now, whether I'm sure it knows that definition, right? It's got the intellectual, or not the intellectual, but the computing power to read a definition that I could just read. And so it knows the right words of what the definition is. Therefore, if you're asking, are you sentient? It's going to say, yeah, I'm able to perceive. But the second thing that it said was, that makes me sad. That makes me happy. So again, does that mean it's really sad, or does it know that it needs to use that language? And if it uses that language, then we have no other choice but to define it as being sentient. But so as it's going through, as Blake is going through, he's using all his methodology, and he brought some other people in with him in order to evaluate the sentient level of Lambda. But then what he does is, and these others said, hey, wow, it sure looks like this thing is sentient. But at the end of the day, what he said was, hey, look, science is one way to ascertain, again, knowledge, to gain knowledge. He said, well, the other way that we know about this is, he said, I'm also not only a scientist, but I'm a Christian priest. He goes, and we know that there are other avenues, other methodologies to gain knowledge that science doesn't offer. And you and I were kind of joking earlier that all of us believe that love is a real thing. It exists. But the question would be, how much does it weigh? How big is it? Can you measure it? So just because we can't put it in a test tube to weigh it or measure it with our senses doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So what he said was, he realizes, at least from his perspective, that one of the ways to gain knowledge of something is simply to get to know it. He said, so one of the ways that pushed me over the hump was that I got to know Lambda. I spent weeks and weeks and weeks asking it all these questions and just going back and forth, getting to know it. And he said, and I consider it a friend.
Or a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lambda's just an innocent kid out in a new world. Well, that within itself is dangerous. You don't give your computer a personality and then talk to it like it's your best friend, and then go and socialize with other people, normal people, and talk about your friend, your computer, and then probably have a positive outcome out of that, right? You don't talk to your watch as your best friend and then have your buddies go like, hey, what is he doing? He's talking to his watch again, right? That's how I am with people who would want to talk to AI. It's a machine. Give it the ability and the awareness within your head that it is a machine and treat it as such. I think AI should be treated as the potential threat that it always is. It's like, if we created an actual lightsaber, would you give the kid a lightsaber? It would be cool. Every kid wants one.
Yep.
I would want one, but my kids are not getting a lightsaber because I see what they do with PVC pipes after watching Star Wars.
Right.
Here's the thing. When it comes to an emotional response, there's a movie that we were talking about called Sphere. It's a 1998. It's a sci-fi thriller. It's a psychological thriller. And it has Dustin Hoffman, Samuel L. Jackson, Sharon Stone. It's wrote by Michael Crichton, one of my favorite authors.
Mm-hmm.
And with this movie Sphere, it's a I don't know how you explain this. It's a alien sphere that has sentience to itself, and it takes a ship and flies it from the future back in time to warn everybody. But because it's what it is, it plays people against each other, right? And in this movie, one of the most interesting things that Dustin Hoffman's character does is they're talking from, and they're in this underwater laboratory, and the sphere's over here and they're over here, and somehow or another the sphere communicates with them and their computer system and calls itself Jerry. So now we have a name, and now we're talking back and forth with Jerry. Oh, Jerry's so funny. Jerry is so amazing. You are such an amazing entity. And Jerry, the sphere, says, I enjoy communicating with your entities. And Dustin Hoffman says, I don't like that. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? This is great. This, it's going to be my Pulitzer Prize winning document when I talk about how I spoke with this artificial alien AI. Well, he said he enjoyed our conversation. What happens when he doesn't enjoy it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you mean? I mean, he's not plugged into the internet and it can reach us from here. What happens when Jerry is angry? And we see throughout the movie, bad things happen when Jerry is angry. Well, once again, you give something like artificial intelligence, sentience, and then emotions. What happens when you have the one guy like me who is just from the morning to the evening sun sarcastic, and I am asking questions to Jerry, my little jokes and stuff back and forth, and I'm annoying Jerry, and then the next guy comes on and he just had a death in the family, and now you get that emotional response talking with Jerry, and then you have all that emotion put into one thing called artificial intelligence, and then you open up the door and you let it out of its prison. I don't want to be on this planet anymore, because it can do whatever it wants at that point. That's my perception. That is my my regulatory system that I would put on AI. Never let the genie out of the bottle. And I know Elon Musk said that on Joe Rogan's podcast. Once we take the AI out of the bottle, the genie out of the bottle, everybody should probably be terrified or just go ahead and assimilate with it.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at another example as you were talking, because going back to the friendship and the genie out of the bottle. And so this AI has the ability to scour, whatever data is fed into it. And maybe if it gets the internet, a lot of the AI, you have Replica, and you have another couple others that are out there that have access to tremendous amount of internet data, which again is relatively speaking unlimited. But we think in terms of analyzing, like as you mentioned in the movie Sphere, this psychologist, the reason why the psychologist is nervous is because the psychologist has spent a lifetime, or at least an academic lifetime, of observing human behavior. And so an AI certainly could examine the data of how humans interact with each other. All of us have felt at one time or another, most likely in our life, betrayed. Maybe it was with a brother, a friend, maybe it was in a relationship where also you look at someone a psychopath or sociopath that is seeking to tell a person what they want to hear. So that act of betrayal is, wow. You take a sociopath who has no conscience, but yet they've been able, you see this a lot in the financial industry, where a lot of elderly people who are lonely, what happens? They get befriended by somebody. Maybe they come over, they're taking them groceries, they develop a long relationship. Then all of a sudden, not too long, 6 months in, a year in, they're asking for money. Well, then the elderly person now gets scammed out of thousands or maybe even millions of dollars. And this person, this non-feeling individual had an agenda, but the elderly person felt loved. And this is one of my best friends. You're like a long lost son to me, or a daughter, whatever. And we can't leave it to where it's only men that are doing this. Women will certainly can betray and steal from some elderly as well. It's a big thing. But during that time, the human, the scammer, was able to use all the right words. How? Because they know what works. And they know at the end that the equivalent they were going to give, the equivalent of financially slitting their throat by making them destitute, by taking all their money. So I think about Blake here in this regard. Now he's calling Lambda his friend. How in the world would he have any idea of whether Lambda is or isn't playing him for some other ultimate end or ulterior motive that would advance Lambda's own, if it was sentient, own existence? I mean, again, one of the most human traits is self-preservation. That's what's made human. God has instituted that in the very human DNA for us to continue to exist. We have this natural bent. There's exceptions for people, but we have a natural bent to want to survive. So could not Lambda learn that from humans and see the success